This morning, arguably the morning of the holiest day of the year, I want to talk a little bit about how much we learn and grow when we are exposed. This current situation that we have been in for months and that we will likely continue to be in for a significant amount of time longer, it's exposing us. It's exposing us and our relationships, and it's giving us the opportunity and perhaps even compelling us to ask questions that we usually don't ask. Questions about how we are spending our time, questions about how we are relating to loved ones, and how we are conducting ourselves in so many ways. Yom Kippur is supposed to be about exposure. It is supposed to be an opportunity for us, stripped of so many of the different trappings of our lives, to face ourselves and to face the people with whom we share our lives and others more honestly and without all of the covering up. In a sense, we've had a 6-month-long Yom Kippur as individuals, as families, as a society, and globally. It can be exhausting, it can be unnerving, but it's also an opportunity. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. Right now, I want to share a story with you, and I want to take you back to the home in which I grew up in New Jersey. So you have to think that this is a Thursday night during the early 1980s. And in walks Mr. Kurt Schlossberger for my weekly piano lesson. Mr. Schlossberger survived the Shoah together with his wife Elsa, who was the librarian of the elementary school that I attended. So he walks in, and I'm really nervous because I haven't practiced, not nearly enough. And I know that he can tell that I haven't practiced after I've played a few notes of whatever it is that I'm going to be playing. So he walks in and he sits down, and my mother brings him a cup of tea, and she brings him some mandel pastry, which the way she makes it is rolled up with raisins and nuts inside. I'm sorry to get so specific about the food on Yom Kippur, but it's part of the story. So he starts eating and he starts sipping and he says to me, "Play." I was playing a Mozart sonata. I got through about half of a page and he said, "Stop." And I stopped. He didn't say anything about the fact that I hadn't practiced. He said, "I have a question for you." So what was the question? In general, he asked me, what is harder to play, Liszt or Mozart? Now, Liszt is very complicated, chords all over the place. If you play Liszt, you wish you were an octopus so that you could be able to reach all of the notes. And Mozart is la, 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 at least the way that I knew it. So I said to him, it's very clear. It is harder to play Liszt. And he said, wrong. And he said it so loudly and so robustly that I was afraid that if he did that again, that I was going to be wearing pastry for the rest of the lesson. And then he went on, and he said, look, plenty of concert pianists play Liszt. It's complicated, and they practice, and they do it very well. But very few play Mozart well. And do you know why? Because it is exposed. Because with Mozart, you can hear each and every note, so that there's no hiding when you play Mozart. No hiding behind tons of chords. If you make a mistake, it's obvious. And he talked a little more, and he told me about Alicia Della Rocha, who was a pianist who played Mozart beautifully, but he said there aren't many, and he sang her praises. And by the time he was done with all of this, the lesson was over. He gathered his napkin, he put it in the empty cup of tea. He was about to leave our house, and he turned to me and he said, next time, practice. The past 6 months have been more exposing than usual. What do I mean? We have been spending extended amounts of times by ourselves. We have been spending extended amounts of times with small groups of people. Both are hard. Generally, we have more distractions. We're surrounded by lots of other people. We might go to the gym or to the mall or to the synagogue or to a ball game. What's it like to be by ourselves? It's not always so easy. What is it like, as my friend likes to say, to spend quantity time with loved ones, time day in and day out, every single meal? You're used to grabbing a snack at work and nobody says anything, but all of a sudden somebody is asking you, how many snacks have you had today? And whatever the issue might be, we are more exposed. The shtick that we all have, our flaws, our idiosyncrasies, all of which gets diluted when we interact in larger groups of people, is exposed in a way that it usually is not. When we go to work day after day, we usually don't stop and ask ourselves, do I enjoy my work? Do I want to find a different ratio of what I do at work, or perhaps a different balance between my work and my home lives? During these 6 months, when many of us have been working differently and some of us have not worked at all, we have had the exposure to ask questions about our work, to be more reflective about it, as we have been exposed to be more reflective about other things. I would say that we are all living an extended Mozart sonata. There's not a lot of place to hide. I mean, sure, you can turn off your Zoom camera and you can enjoy yourselves while the rabbi is giving his sermon, but you know what I mean. We are overall more exposed during this situation than we generally are. To put it differently, we are living an extended Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day that we're supposed to remove the mask. Well, that's an interesting image. Yom Kippur is the day that we are supposed to ask ourselves the difficult questions without all the hustle and bustle, all the things that cover up and protect us from being more honest with ourselves and with other people. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? How are we treating the people around us? Are we using our time effectively? We just said the words earlier today. God is bochein levavot. God probes what is in our hearts. On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would walk into the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, by himself. Usually he was surrounded by the other Kohanim, by his family, but he was completely by himself, and he would approach God and call God by God's most essential name and try to achieve kapara, renewal, atonement. Yom Kippur is the day of exposure. We ask ourselves, what are our imperfections? Some of our imperfections lead to growth, and they can be a good thing. Some of our imperfections are just impeding us and impeding other people, and we have to find ways to push them away. And to ask ourselves, what are the changes that we might want to make in our lives? This is an opportunity, as scary as it is. I have had people within our congregation and outside of our congregation come to me and say some version of, for so long I had been living on autopilot. I just did what I did, and now I'm starting to ask questions. Do I like what I do at work? Can I make a change? Do I like the balance between work and home? Do I like the way that I am treating the people that I love the most in the world? People are asking questions that we don't usually ask during this extended Yom Kippur. And some people have said, I'm going to make a change of some kind. And you know, often we tell ourselves we can't make changes because it's just too difficult. But sometimes we can make little changes. Sometimes more change is possible than we imagine. Our exposure can actually set off a chain of reactions that can have positive repercussions for us and for other people. This past June 14th, our son got married, and he and his then fiance, now wife, spent 2 months living with us at the beginning of the pandemic, before the wedding. They asked me to be the officiating rabbi, which was great. Usually I meet a few times with a couple before I'm going to officiate at the wedding. And you know what? You can hide a lot from the rabbi in 1 or 2 meetings. But when you're living with someone for 2 straight months, it's very hard to hide. And I got to know them as a couple, and it was actually very reassuring to see the way that they treat each other as a couple and to see the playful and loving and respectful dynamic that they have. Now, the wedding day itself was not as we initially planned. There were a small number of people. Most of us were not wearing the outfits that we intended to wear at the wedding. There was no big cocktail hour. There was no hora. It took place outdoors in our in-laws' beautiful backyard with a simple chuppah that our son and his fiancée built using materials from Home Depot. Very different than what we had planned. The entire event was simplified and pared down, and I would say exposed. Now, there was something exquisitely powerful about that exposed wedding, especially coming on the heels of extended quantity and quality time with a couple. We saw and felt several things that day as clearly and radiantly as the sun thankfully was shining. We saw and felt the shining personalities of the bride and the groom. We saw and we felt the deep love that their friends have for them and that they have for their friends. We saw and felt the generosity and the profound goodness of the bride's family, which was clear to us before the wedding and clear on the wedding and gets clearer and clearer every day. We saw and we felt the sweet miracle of two people very much in love and prepared to set off to live their lives together, come what may. A few of their friends afterward came up and said, you know, when this is over, we'd like to have this kind of a wedding. And I wonder aloud, how different will celebrations be when this is over? Perhaps they will be different to some degree by virtue of what we had learned, which is the blessing of exposure. Perhaps you have had a similar exposed simcha in these past months. There's another phrase that we said earlier today, and with this I will conclude. Right after we say that God is bochen klayot, that bochen livavot, that God sees into our hearts, we refer to God as goleh amukot, which I will translate as the one who exposes the depths. God gives us the opportunity to expose the depths. Exposure can be scary, but if we see it as an opportunity, it can lead to awareness and growth. So let's try to use this time, this extended Yom Kippur, to ask the questions that we usually don't ask. Let's try to use this time to consider appropriate course corrections that we usually don't consider. Yom Kippur 5781, we'll remember this Yom Kippur for a long time. It is a true day of exposure, surrounded by months of exposure that none of us asked for, but that may actually be a source of kapara, renewal, atonement for each of us. With clear recognition of all of the pain and all of the anxiety and all of the loss that we have experienced, I want to say to each and every one of us, when we are exposed, each of us becomes Alicia de la Rocha, playing our own music with clarity and grace. And each of us becomes the Kohen Gadol, entering the Holy of Holies and calling upon God's most essential name and hopefully discovering our own. Shana Tova and Gemar Chatima Tova. Let it be a good year, a year of good exposure and good reflection and good growth for each of us. Amen.